Why is it important to have a correct understanding of these things? Now, falsehood, i.e., false images, false narratives, for example, origin, history, ancestry, awareness, can distort mental faculties. What does that mean? So, if we have a distorted view of our origins as a humanity, and we believe that we evolved, yeah, and we erase the creator from our thinking, then our thinking becomes tainted. So we believe that we evolved from monkeys and fish and broth and froth, and we exclude the creator. Therefore, our thinking, our mental faculties, our spiritual faculties are also impaired. So that's a distortion of origin, can lead us to all kinds of immorality and depravity. Conversely, false images, when we see a false image, it can also have that same impact too. You know, when we have false, what was I going to say, history of who we are, of where we've came from, that can also impact us as well. So let's just say your father was a serial rapist and a murderer, but your family never told you about the history of your father, and you so happen to move into a location where your father committed most of his crimes and the descendants are still there who obviously have a vendetta against your father, but you've taken your far south and gone there unawares, then you might reap the iniquity of your father unawares because you weren't privy to the history of your ancestry. And not only that, if you have a distorted view of who you are, it can lead you to be who anyone tells you to be. So if you don't know who you are, it can have a distorted view and you can be who anybody wants you to be. And in turn, mental faculties are gone. So you see there in ancestry, you got a lion, but the lion doesn't really know what it is. So the lion's got a perm instead of letting its natural throw show. And also, you've never ever really seen a penguin look at itself and want to get a nose job because it's trying to assimilate and it's trying to become, I don't know, a chicken or a polar bear. So just knowing who you are and where you're coming from and your ancestry is very important to one's identity. And we also know with false narratives, it can also contribute to a distorted view, distorted mentality, and making wrong decisions on wrong choices. And not only that, but these distortions, if not corrected, can then become self-fulfilling prophecies. So when someone tells you something that's incorrect, but you perceive it as true, it can then become a self-fulfilling prophecy, meaning you then go out and reproduce what you've been told. So if somebody says you get what I'm trying to say. So you'll go on to reenact and fulfill the prophecy that's been spoken over you, or the falsehood that's been spoken over you. And the technical term that they call it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Example of falsehood, you can see here that imagery is powerful and can reflect how one is seen and how one sees themselves. So you've got here a few things. You've got this watermelon and how the watermelon evolved to represent a certain type of people. And then you got the watermelon here and how it evolved to represent a certain type of stereotype. And then you've got certain imagery here, which is hypersexualized female. And then you have imagery here, which is to represent scary, untainable uncivilized person. So these things, just these images alone, they say that a picture paints 1,000 words. So imagery alone is very powerful. And a lot of people say that imagery doesn't matter. It's just the picture. It's just music. It's just this. It's just that. But imagery is very powerful, especially if it's used in the wrong way. So, like I said, this one here is dehumanized. It's a dehumanized image. This one, you don't really want to take this one seriously, and like this one is very intimidating. This is like somebody wearing a hoodie, very scary. This is twerking, you know. So it's certain. So you can put certain attributes and certain characteristics just to these images, and we could talk about these 4 images for 4 hours, but that's not the point of today's study. But just going through how imagery, how distorted history, how distorted views can have an impact on one mentally, and by having an impact on one mentally, it can then have an impact on one spiritually. A good cartoon that kind of encapsulates this is probably The Lion King. You got a lion who doesn't know who he is. He's run away from his history. He meets up with Timon and Pumbaa, and before you know it, he thinks he's a pig, or he thinks he's a meerkat, And his mindset becomes a YOLO mindset. He gets a Bob Marley mindset. Don't worry about a thing, Hakuna Matata, yeah. But then we all know how the story goes. He has to come back and he has to, embrace his history, embrace who he is, and then do what he has to do. But all these things are very deep in little subtle ways. Okay. Now, often people will say, let's move on. Or they'll say, onwards and upwards, to recoil any backpedaling or to minimize undesirable history. But without having an account of the past, we may not be going upwards and onwards, but onwards and downwards. If we don't know our history, if we don't know the mistakes of the past, then we can just replicate the mistakes of the past by not knowing the mistakes of the past. And you'd be surprised how many fallacies of the past are embedded in modern society as truth and as, irrefutable. There's a quote up here by a guy called George Orwell, and it says, the most effective way to destroy people is to shoot them and to beat them, and that will destroy them. No. The most effective way to destroy people is to sleep with the women and sleep with all of them, and then hopefully through blanchiamento they'll be destroyed. No. It says the most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of European history, of a history. No, it says of their history. So the most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. Which makes a lot of sense, like we looked at earlier. If you don't know who you are, you'll be what anybody wants you to be. John Henrik Clarke also says, in unison with George Orwell, to control a people, you must first control what they think about themselves, how they regard their history and culture. And when your conqueror makes you ashamed of your culture and your history, he needs no prison walls and no chains to hold you. Now remember, we just looked at these 4 images, and we see these 4 images very much embedded in the psyche even today. Our women want to be hypersexualized. and men want to be these scary, intimidating creatures. You know, we're very much replicating to the decimal point history, which is distorted, which we have embraced and infused into our psyche and into our culture, which is tainting us spiritually and mentally as a people. But let's move on. So for some reason, my screen is ridiculously small. I'm having a few issues trying to look at this display. Okay, there we are. All right, that's way too big. One extreme to another. Okay, let me just see. Oh, okay, a lot better. Okay, a lot better. So, apologies on the spelling. So, the Negro. All right, let me read this first. This is a Jehovah's Witness, and this is their philosophy when it comes to the identity of the black race. Now, the reason I wanted to touch on this as well is because many of us tend to lump ourselves into a black box. So we'll see somebody who looks melanated and we'll say they're black. We'll lose and strip that identity away and we'll just say, yeah, he's black, she's black. So everyone from Africa is just considered black, which biblically is incorrect. The Bible doesn't deal with black, white, yellow, red, and white. That actually came from a German professor, or what do you call it, Afro-apologist humanitarian called Johann Blumenbach, and he fragmented the world into four, and he said that the world should be, and he basically divided the world into four, red, yellow, black, and white. Hence, when you go to most churches, sometimes they might sing this song, Jesus loves his little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. That's actually riddled with white supremacy philosophy. But that's another story that I'll probably share another day. In fact, if you're interested, I've done a video covering that, and let me know and I'll put it in the description. But nevertheless, this is a quote from the Jehovah's Witness, and it says, there was a question that was asked, and the question was, is there anything in the Bible that reveals the origin of the Negro? And the answer was, it is generally believed that the curse which Noah pronounced upon Canaan was the origin of the black race. Certain it is that when Noah said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren," he pictured the future of the colored race. They have been and are a race of servants. But now, in the dawn of the 20th century, we are all coming to see this matter of service in its true light, and to find that the only real joy in life is in serving others, not bossing them. There is no servant in the world as good as a good colored servant, and the joy he gets from rendering faithful service is one of the purest joys there is in the world. Now, let me just quickly throw this quote in here. If I've got it, I hope I have. All right, let me find it quickly. Boom. Okay. Now, just gonna throw Ibrahim X Kendi in here. He says, actually, you know what? Let me read what people perceive. So Negroes, until recently, saw themselves biblically through either one of the following lenses. They saw themselves as cursed due to the mark of Cain, which is predominantly taught in Mormonism. They saw themselves as cursed because of Ham, which is a mainstream Christian teaching. However, Ham was never cursed. It was only his son Canaan, so we know that is incorrect. And further to that, they also regard themselves as cursed because of Canaan, which is a mainstream teaching. Very recently, I came across somebody else who believed that they were cursed because it was a black person who carried the cross or carried the wooden instrument for the Messiah. So they said, or for the Hamashiach. So they said this was the reason why Satan doesn't like so-called black people, because they were the ones who carried the cross for Yeshua. So these kind of mindsets are what people have had over the years. People who have been Bible juggernauts, like men of principle, men of conviction, men of strong acumen, but they've seen themselves through these lenses. Either I'm just my condition as a nation has been brought on because of the curse of Cain. When we know that only Seth's lineage was, I'm not going to get into it. But anyway, they say they're cursed because of Cain, which is predominantly a Mormon teaching. But other Christian denominations used to subscribe to that teaching also. The more popular one was the curse of Ham, which is a mainstream Christian teaching. And the curse of Canaan, which was then corrected because they realized that Ham wasn't cursed, it was Canaan. So then it became Canaan, which then became a mainstream teaching for quote-unquote black people in the black box. And then you had a new, well, probably not new, but I came across it recently where people believed that they were condemned to hardship because they carried the cross for the Hamashiach. So these were the viewpoints that we have had up until recently of who we are, and how we would classify ourselves and why we behave or replicate this theory or this philosophy, because it's what we've been told, it's what's been drilled into the skull. Anyway, Abraham X. Kendi says, time and again, racist ideas have not been cooked up from the boiling point of ignorance and hate. Time and again, powerful and brilliant men and women have produced racist ideas in order to justify the racist policies of their era, in order to redirect the blame for their era's racial disparities away from those policies and onto black people. So when we sort of think of racism, we sort of envision Donald Trump and all these, overt or covert or not as smart or not as, coming with the gravitas. Yeah, we just envision these kind of, for want of a better word, quote unquote uneducated, certain stereotypes will circulate in their head like hillbillies and this, that and the other. But no, interestingly, it's the aristocracy, it's the guys higher up the chain that have fermented these racist policies, whether it be in academia and whether it be in religion. So aside from this, let's go and watch this following clip and then I'll come back to you in a second. Now, the next clip that you're going to see, let me just introduce the clip first, I guess. The clip that you're going to see is of a Christian church. It's in a movie, but you're going to see how they justified slavery through the misconception of the curse of Canaan. So I'm going to let the video play, then I'll get back to you.
At this point, let me remind you that God condemned to slavery the damned posterity of Canaan in the days of Joshua. God ordained by express statute to Abraham's posterity that they should buy slaves, and decreed that those slaves would be a perpetual inheritance for their children. God recognized Abraham as the owner of slaves he had bought, commanding him to circumcise them. And Jesus ordained that whosoever dared to raise seditious doubts as to the benevolence of the institution of slavery should be cast out and scorned, not only as a danger to the state, but destructive to the true nature of the gospel. God decreed by law that slavery be honored and obeyed, being his ordainment. Jesus himself established by law the relation of master and slave. The master must exercise without any weakness his authority over the slave. The master must not hesitate to punish him severely, whipping him with the number of lashes commensurate to the offense. All this, dear brethren, is made known to us by the recorded language of the Bible. Slavery is therefore a divine institution, ordered and sanctioned by God. Therefore, with all the authority invested in me by the church, I, Reverend Thornton Stringfellow of the state of Virginia, order you to honor slavery and not to discuss it on the basis of false moral premises.
Okay, so you've just seen that clip, and the guy had a full congregation, people dressed in modest clothes, wearing ties and shirts and well groomed, you know, had cologne on, hair covered, suit, ties, Armani sweatshirts, you know, gold plated watches. You get what I'm trying to say. There's well dressed, well spoken individuals. Now, we know, I want to quote Brother Muhammad Ali. Now people are going to say, oh, he's quoting a Muslim. Okay, let's look past the guy's religious connotation. I'm for truth no matter who says it. I'm for justice no matter who it's for or against. So by that, I mean, I'll quote anyone who says anything that's truthful, and I'm not really going to be bamboozled by their religious affiliation. Okay, so he says, hating people because of their colour is wrong, and it doesn't matter which colour does the hate in. It's just plain wrong, and I agree. Hating because of melanin, lack of melanin is just wrong on all levels. So I just wanted you to see that without getting, you know, vexed and frustrated and this, that and the other. I wanted everyone to take a mature approach as we look back into the history. And I just wanted you to see that the thing that was being taught by the hierarchy to the laity was the curse of Canaan, and everyone was lumped into this so-called black box. Every nation of so-called Negroid looking people were just thrown into a black box, and as a result it was justifiable slavery because it was divine, it was preordained, it was, you know, most high sanctioned, you know. But was that the case to that degree and to that excess? Let's see, and let's go through this study some more. So like I said, the Bible was used to reinforce the Canaanite philosophy onto slaves and onto black people in general. So just any black person, you just say, hey, yeah, he's going for this hardship. Why? He's a Canaanite. Yeah, he's going for this hardship. Why? He's a Canaanite. Yeah, he's going for this hardship. Why? He's a Canaanite. So that was the thing that was used just to allow this continuation of brutality, barbarism, and so on and so forth. And they could quote back to the scripture and say, look, the Most High doesn't like them anyway. They're Canaanites. So therefore, we're doing the Most High a service, and we're also doing you, our fellow man, a service. But notice this wasn't coming from the hillbillies up. This was coming from the hierarchy down. Yeah? You'll find that you probably got more in common with a hillbilly, not justifying hillbillies, but you'll find you probably got more in common with a hillbilly in terms of life than the aristocracy and the people who float around in the Bilderberg circles. Just throwing it out there. But anyway, so here you have it. The philosophy was beaten into the people. Colossians 2 verse 8 says, beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Hamashiach. So like I said, well, we're going to look into this. We've looked at this previously, but we know that after the ark, after Noah and his sons came off the ark, the progenitors of the whole of mankind were 3 sons, and those 3 sons had sons, and those sons became nations, and then the world diversified. But if you look at this here, it's got 4 representations of mankind, when we know there was 3, Ham, Shem, Japheth. But here there's 4, and the Indians at the bottom, the Chinese man's at one side, the Negroes at one side, and the Caucasians at the top. So this was a vain philosophy in its entirety because it was free, not for. And this book was called The Bible, The Defense of Slavery, Origins, History, and Fortunes, and the plan of national colonization. You know what I like about reading books? Reading books that are written, I don't know, in the 17th or, quite ancient, antiquated books. The beauty of reading these books is that it's just in there plain for everyone to see without any ambiguity, without any confusion. It's just written there plain because they genuinely thought they were doing the Most High a service, or they genuinely were just so full of self, I guess, that they just put it out there in publications. And because a lot of us couldn't read, then only the elite within our community would be able to read. But those elites within our community would have already been primed to be a boule or a puppet pastor or a puppet elder or a puppet, whatever puppet they would have on a string. So by and large, the average Joe wouldn't be able to read. Even when you look at William Tyndale, he had to translate the Bible into English to give the common people in England, who were also being persecuted by the aristocracy and the powers that be in a higher echelon of that society, he had to give it them in their native tongue so that they could understand and break down the scriptures for themselves, So just to reiterate what Abraham said, it's always been the intelligent that have thought of these thoughtful things to keep people in a state of cognitive dissonance and confusion, Well, let's go through some more. So I didn't get this guy's name, which is unfortunate, but this is what this guy said. And I've titled this The Black Box Perception, how everyone just gets lumped into the black box. Okay, so he says, because Ham was the father of black people, and because he and his descendants were cursed, notice it says he and his descendants. Ham was never cursed. His descendants were never cursed in plural. His descendant was Canaan, and his descendants, his offspring, were also, because they were linked to Canaan. But anyway, we're going to see all this eventually through the study. Because Ham was the father of the black people, and because he and his descendants were cursed to be slaves because of his sin against Noah, some Christians said, Africans and their descendants are destined to be servants and should accept their status as slaves in fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Now, there existed a myth of inferiority with apparent biblical roots. This theological basis provided the raw material necessary to convince the slaves that to resist their assigned inferior status was to resist the will of God. This myth became an authoritative myth because it was rooted in theology. And slave owners used this twisted theology to sustain a perverted sociology. This process is known as scholarization, the development of theological and religious beliefs to serve the interest of a particular ethnic or racial group. Going back to Abraham, if I can just throw him in there again. If I can just quickly find him, that is, where is he? Boom, boom, boom. I need to get this, I need to keep repeating this quote, because a lot of people think it's Tom, Dick and Harry. But in actual fact, it's the affluent in the society that think of these horrendous things. He says time and time and again, ideas have not been cooked up from the boiling pot of ignorance and hate, but time and again, powerful and brilliant men and women have produced racist ideas in order to justify the racist policies of their era in order to redirect the blame for their errors, racial disparities, away from those policies and onto black people. So this is a generational education that is maintaining these certain myths. And it's education that's not just education in the secular world, but education that is in the religious world. So it's a twofold union of secular education and even religious education, which puts, quote unquote, black people into the black box. And as a result, comes the white supremacy narratives, so on and so forth. But okay, I'm going to assume that no one's heard of this, the story of Noah. So it's always best not to assume, so that there's a clean slate. So I'm going to quickly go through the story of Noah. I've covered this immensely on other studies, so I'm not really going to take too long on the particular slides, but I just want people to be on the same platform as we go through. So remember I said how the white supremacist theology split the world into four: white, yellow, black, red, yellow, black and white. Yeah. So we're just going to go through what the Bible actually teaches in regards to humanity's early origins and early ancestry and early ancestry. Okay, so the founding fathers of nations. Genesis 10 verse 10. Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were sons born after the flood. So Noah had three sons, Japheth, Ham, and Shem. Now, to be honest, all three progenitors, Japheth, Ham, and Shem, would have been very melanated people. Even Japheth. But due to migration and demography of where people were going to, their body would have adapted to the climate. I mean, when I go to a hot climate, I'm tanned, in terms of glowing. Then when I go to a cold climate, it's like I'm looking pale. So climate does play a part, and also health conditions as well would also play a part. So initially they started all off melanated. Over the course of time, the melanin started to decrease and people spread out and this, that, the other. We can get all scientific for 10 days and talk about how this happened like this and how it happened like that. But the main thing is there were three sons. And these three sons were called Japheth, Ham, and Shem. And everyone came through either Ham, Shem, or Japheth. Oh, okie dokie. So I'm going to quickly read through this. So Jubilees 8, verse 8 to 11. And in the 6th year thereof, she bare him a son and called him Peleg, for in the days when he was born, the children of Noah began to divide the earth amongst themselves. For this reason he called his name Peleg. And they divided it secretly amongst themselves and told Noah. And it came to pass in the beginning of the 33rd Jubilee that they divided the earth into 3 parts. How many parts? 3 parts. Not 4, not 5, not 6, but 3 parts. For Shem and Ham and Japheth, according to the inheritance of each, in the 1st year, in the 1st week, when one of us who had been sent was with them. And he called his sons, and they drew nigh to him, and their children, and he divided the earth into the lots, which his 3 sons were to take in possession, and they reached forth their hands, and took the writing out of the bosom of Noah their father. So the earth was divided into 3 between Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Gonna go through these quickly because I've already touched on these before. So apologies if you think I'm going a bit too fast. Jubilees 9, verse 1. So, and Ham divided. So we got Noah dividing the land between his 3 sons. So the world at that point was divided 3 ways. And then Noah's 3 sons then divided the world between their sons. And then the world started to diversify because there was a lot more sons and a lot more land to be shared. So Ham divided amongst his sons. And the first portion came forth for Cush towards the east, which would be the Ethiopians, Eritreans, and Somalians, that kind of phenotype. And to the west of him for Mizraim, so Mizraim was known as Egypt, and to the west of him for Put, and to the west thereof on the sea for Canaan. Okay, so he divided it amongst his sons, and that was Ham. Okay. So Ham, Shem, Japheth divide the world to their sons, and they also make an oath not to steal one another's land. And thus the sons of Noah divided unto their sons in the presence of Noah their father, and he bound them all by one oath, imprecating a curse on everyone that sought to seize the portion which had not fallen to him by his lot. And they all said, so be it, for themselves and their sons forever throughout their generation to the day of judgment, on which the Lord God shall judge them with a sword, with fire, for all the unclean wickedness of their errors, wherewith they have filled the earth with transgression, uncleanness, fornication, and sin. When we read Proverbs, it says, 22 verse 28 says, remove not the ancient landmarks which thy fathers have set. Remove not the ancient landmarks which thy fathers have set. We know there's a lot of confusion in a lot of places because after colonialism or during colonialism, a lot of landmarks, ancestral landmarks, were just rearranged haphazardly. So you had enemies that you had friends now invading the territory of enemies, enemies invading the territory of friends, and it was just up for debate who should have what and how it should be divided. And as a result, there was a lot of genocides. We have the Tutsi and the Rwanda, and there's so many different atrocities that have taken place, even in India. And you have the Pakistanis and you have the Bengalis, even in Burma, and you have the issues in Burma because land hasn't been divided, or it's been divided, but due to colonial powers, when they left and uprooted, the landmarks were kept out of sync, and as a result, wars and wickedness, has been the byproduct of these things. Okay, so now the Bible says why Ham's son Canaan was cursed by Noah. So Genesis 9 verse 18 to 23, and the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Ham is the father of Canaan. Now, interestingly, the Bible always does that thing, When you read the genealogy of Ham, Shem, and Japheth, it will give you their genealogy. But then when it goes to Shem, it will mention Eber. And you're thinking, why is the Bible randomly mentioning Eber in the same as before it even gets to Shem's children? So it just mentions his grandchild Eber randomly. But we know it's not random. We broke it down on the previous study. But anyway, now when you get to this verse, it says, and the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Ham is the father of Canaan. So it just introduces you to the character that's going to be prevalent next on the scene. But anyway, and these are the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. So of four sons, the whole earth was overspread? No. Of these, the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. And Noah began to be a husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine, and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment, and laid it upon both their shoulders, and went backward, and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. So Noah woke from his wine, and knew what his younger son had done to him. Then he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants, he shall be to his brethren. And he said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. So we see here that Canaan was going to be a servant to both Shem and Japheth. But we also notice here that it was actually Ham that did whatever he did towards Noah. Some say he uncovered the wife of Noah. Some people say he just saw his dad naked and told his brothers and gossiped, and then his brothers covered his nakedness. Some even say that Ham, what's it called? What's that word? Castrated Noah, because Noah doesn't have any more children. He only has the 3, and he lived a long time. So people say he was castrated. But these are speculations. These are, they're not concrete arguments by any stretch of the imagination. All we have is what's written in the Holy Writ to go by on this particular occasion, which is good enough for me. I don't need to investigate anymore, in terms of that, because it'll just be speculation. But nevertheless, just to go a bit further now. So we see that it was only Cain. All right, it was only Canaan that was cursed. So Ham was the one who did it, but only Canaan was cursed. Now Ham had 1, 2, 3, 4 sons. 1, 2, 3, 4 sons. Then he had grandsons, and then his grandsons had sons, and then he had great grandchildren. But the only one of Ham, who is this guy here, the only one of Ham's sons that was cursed wasn't this guy. Wasn't this guy. Actually, let me move this so you can see. I'll just put that there so you can see. Let me move this. All right, there we go. That's better. So you got Ham. He had his 4 sons: Mizraim, Put, and Cush, and Canaan. And it was only Canaan, this guy here, that was cursed. And then through Canaan, you have all these sons here, and you have Sidon and Heth. But it's only Canaan, Sidon, Heth, and these guys here that fall under that. Cush, the Ethiopians didn't fall under that. Put, Mizraim, all these people, Only Ham, son, Canaan, was to be a servant to Shem and Japheth. But in mainstream Christendom, I don't know how we all just got through into the black box, where we just say someone who's a Cushi, an Ethiopian, Eritrean, Somalian, we just say, yeah man, they're all black. Someone who's Put, we say black. Mizraim, Egyptian, he had various sons. Even the Philistines came through Mizraim. Yeah, one of Israel's most notable opponents, David and Goliath, they come through Mizraim. Yeah. Cush, him you get Nimrod, but in Cush you get Seba, and Seba's where the queen of Sheba came from. She was the descendant of Seba. And then through this line you also get Taharka. Taharka was the pharaoh of Sudan. It was a Sudanese pharaoh, and he come through Cush. So not all these people here were cursed. So not here. This square here wasn't even cursed. Not even the Philistines, for what not even, what I'm trying to say. And in Nimrod you get Nineveh. Yeah, and we know that Nineveh, Jonah was sent to Nineveh, and they accepted the message. And then I think in Nahum they were destroyed because they went back on the covenant. But I'm just trying to make you see that it was just this one son here that this curse of servanthood, it doesn't say anything else, it's just cursed to be a servant. Yeah? It was only this one son here that was cursed. So now we're at a crossroad. If everyone is black, who's cursed and who's not cursed, and who did these curses apply to, and who did they not apply to? That's an interesting question. So we see Canaan was just to be, again, for emphasis. Probably should bring the arrow. Let me try and bring this arrow. Oh, I can't bring the arrow. No? Alright. So we just see that he was to be a servant for Shem, and he was also to be a servant for Japheth. Okay? Hope that makes sense. Crystal clear on that. There's another thing that, according to the book of Jubilees, which is canonical in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and the Ethiopian Beta Israel community, which is part of their fish and chips, bread and butter, when it comes to their books, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Jubilees is in there with those. In the book of Jubilees, it mentions something else that Canaan did, which potentially could be why Noah, through the eyes of prophecy, rebuked Canaan especially. Who knows? Anyway, Jubilees 10 to 28 to 34. And Ham and his sons went into the land which he was to occupy, which he acquired as his portion in the land of the south. And Canaan saw the land of Lebanon to the river of Egypt, that it was very good. And he went not into the land of his inheritance to the west, that is, to the sea. And he dwelt in the land of Lebanon, eastward and westward from the border of Jordan, and from the border of the sea. And Ham, his father, Cush, Mizraim, his brothers, said unto him, Thou hast settled in a land which is not thine, and which did not fall to us by lot. Do not do so, for if thou doest do so, thou and thy sons will fall in the land and be accursed through sedition, for by sedition ye have settled, and by sedition will thy children fall, and thou shalt be rooted out forever. Dwell not in the dwelling of Shem, for to Shem and to his sons did it come by their lot. Cursed art thou, and cursed art thou beyond all the sons of Noah, by the curse by which we bound ourselves by the oath in the presence of the holy judge, and in the presence of Noah our father. But he didn't hearken unto them, and dwelt in the land of Lebanon, for Hamath, to entering of Egypt, he and his sons until this day. And for this reason, that land is named Canaan. So they divided the world three ways. Ham, Shem, Japheth, divided it again between their sons. And the land of Shem was infiltrated by the son of Ham, which would be Shem's nephew, who was coveted his nephew's land. And as a result, he took his uncle's land, and the land was named Canaan. So when we see in the Bible a lot of incidences surrounding Canaan, this is the background story which led to a lot of the events. Now, the Canaanites were subdued largely during the reign of Joshua. Joshua 9:23. Now therefore ye are cursed, and there shall none of you be freed from being bondmen, and hewers of wood, and drawers of water for the house of my Yah. And we see that one of Canaan's sons was called the Amorites. And in Genesis 15:16 it says, And they shall come back here in the 4 generations, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So even his posterity had an opportunity to get right with the Most High. And the Most High wasn't going to bring out judgment against them until the cup of their iniquity was full. Not only that, when we read Exodus, Deuteronomy, we see that the Canaanites were one of the most formidable opponents to the nation of Israel. And it shall be, when the Lord shall bring thee into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, which swear unto thy fathers. When did they swear unto their fathers? It wasn't Abraham, interestingly. It was Shem. A land flowing with milk, honey, that thou shalt keep this service in this month. Because the original covenant of that land was between Shem and his siblings, you know. Deuteronomy 7 verse 1. When the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land which thou goest to possess it, and have cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. Deuteronomy 20 verse 17. But thou shalt utterly destroy them, namely the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, as the Lord God hath commanded thee. And we know that the Most High called Israel his battle axe to bring judgment on the nations during their administration, when the Most High was present with them in the sanctuary, in the tabernacle. They were his people to execute judgment as well. So I just wanted you to see that Canaan's sons, Sidon, the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Hivites, Architites, Sinanites, Arvadites, Zeramadites, Hamamathites, all these different ites and kites, they all came through Canaan, and a lot of them were subdued during Joshua. A lot of the ones that you see there were subdued by Joshua's campaign, and even obliterated, you could say. Also, a remnant again was subdued during the reign of Solomon, and all the people that were left of the Amorites, and all the people that were left of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, which were not of the children of Israel, their children that were left after them in the land, whom the children of Israel also were not able utterly to destroy, upon those did Solomon levy a tribute of bond service unto this day. So when people say that, probably like Africans, or I don't even like to use the word African because it doesn't make sense, but when you hear people say we were being sold by people who had the same phenotype or same group, if there was anyone who was going to sell us, let's remember that we first sold ourselves, like we first sold Joseph to the Midianites, or the Ishmaelites. We know the Ishmaelites and the Midianites became one, but we were the first to sell our brethren. But if it was to hazard a guess of who could have probably contributed and was one of our fierce rivals, potentially the remnant of the seed of Canaan, were one of the people who were at the forefront of gathering the rebellious, let's not forget, the rebellious Israelites and selling them off. That's just one theory. That's just me theorizing. Don't take that as the gospel. That's just a theory that I've just thought and I'm putting out there. But like I said, don't take that as the gospel. I'm just saying what I'm saying. But if you look here, I should have my arrow, but my arrow is not here. Okay, where's my arrow? Hopefully I can bring this arrow across. Oh, where's my arrow? Okay, forget it. So if you look at the bottom corner of your screen, it's superimposed. You can see Canaan magnified, and that strip that you see there, which we now know we call Israel, or is known as the land of Israel, was, before it was the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, because Canaan stole it according to the book of Jubilees. But all around that particular location was the sons of Canaan too. And we know when Israel was going through, they had to battle various tribes along the way. And the tribes that they were battling was the sons of Canaan. Okay, I hope that's clear. And we know that through the lineage of Shem, like I said, all these three progenitors, you would call melanated people, to be honest. But we've just looked at Ham, and we've seen who came through Ham. Through Shem, we looked at this briefly. No, we looked at this in detail last time. But through Shem, you get all these various nations too, who would have been melanated as well. Even Japheth's posterity would have been melanated also, tanned, for want of a better word. So you look at Shem, you got the Elamites, the Indians, the Luds. I haven't really figured out who they might be. But then when you go through Arphaxad and you go further down, Terah was the father of Abraham. Then you got Abraham, Then Abraham had 4 wives. He had Sarah, and through Sarah you get Isaac, Jacob, and the Israelites. But then he also had Hagar, and then through Hagar you get the Ishmael and the Ishmaelites. But he also had another wife called Keturah, and then through Keturah you got the Midianites, and the Midianites fused with Ishmael, and they became the Arabs. So those two became one. We looked at this before in a previous study. And also, Abraham had a nephew called Lot by his brother Haran, and Lot produced the Moabites and the Ammonites. So you had a lot of different nations, is what I'm trying to get to. You had these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sons, and these 5 sons, had sons for themselves, and these sons became different nations. So the nation of Shem and Ham was quite diverse, and we know that it was Moses who was able to infiltrate not infiltrate, but was able to, you could call it infiltrate. He was able to blend in the Mizraim state. He was able to blend in Egypt. Also, Joseph was able to blend in Egypt to the extent that his brothers didn't even recognize that he was their brother, because he was just able to blend in because they resembled each other that well, But all right, let's just move on a little bit. So, looking at the curses, when you look at the curses of Canaan, it says, and he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren." That was it. Just going to be a servant. When you look at Israel now, there was blessings and there was curses. Now, just handpicked a few curses. Even when you look at what Jeremiah was saying as well, Jeremiah said in Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 14, he said, "Is Israel a servant? Is he a homeborn slave? Why is he spoiled?" Now, when you look at the history of Israel, captivity in Babylon, captivity in Persia, captivity in Greece, captivity in Rome, captivity in America. When you look at the nation, they've gone through just a lot of captivity with every succeeding generation. In fact, they found a little bit of respite in the Persian dynasty, but the Persians were of the seed of Shem, which I find interesting. They're the ones who gave them all the decrees to go back and rebuild and restore. They were of the line of Shem. And a lot of your religions that you see today, like Sikhism, Hinduism, all these guys were Shemitic people, which is another thing that's very interesting. All right, so the curses we see were slavery and captivity, having no power to stand against their enemies, sent back to Egypt in ships, which we know to be bondage, exiled in the land of their enemies, scattered among all nations, very sick and disease-stricken people, at the bottom of the social ladder. They lost the true knowledge of who they are and will be called by many scornful nicknames other than Israel. Packed into prisons and jails, non-prosperous people, oppressed people by their enemies, very, 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 very religious, and members of all religions. When you come across a Hebrew in a religion, he's the most religious guy you could ever fathom. You know what I'm saying? The most Israelite woman, Israelite man, they're going to be the most, And also it says they'll borrow or they'll lend, but there'll be a nation of borrowers, not a nation of lenders. There's loads of things I could have dropped in there, but I'm just trying to highlight the differences between Canaan of just being a servant of servants to his brethren, and then the curses that was going to befall the Shemitic people. Okay, so we know that the Bible was used to reinforce certain supremacy narratives, So there's a few scriptures there for you to ponder regarding Deuteronomy 28. Now, I don't know any other so-called African nation. Notice I didn't say Africa because Africa is a continent. I'm on about an African nation to go through all this stuff. I don't know of Somalians, of what do you call them again? Kushis. I don't know any Kushis who went through any of this, like Somalians scattered, because Somalians and Eritreans and Ethiopians, they might have in-house politics and war, but they're still by and large in that same area, and they know who they are, and they know their identity, and they know their surnames. Yeah. But by and large, when it comes to the Negro now, the Negro's called everything under the sun. The Negro's called Will Smith, Samuel Jackson, Morgan Freeman. We've got all these just random European type kind of names, you know? So in a weird way, you could say the curses have become a blessing for us to be able to identify what particular nation of people went through this experience to this multitude and this magnitude to this day. A dictionary definition of Compact Dictionary Bible, it says Ham, his name perhaps means hot. He was the youngest son of Noah, born probably 96 years before the flood, and one of 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. I'll stop there. I came across this really interesting quote as well. I'll just make it a little bit bigger. It says, all right, I'll leave it where it is. It's not working for me today. But it's by a guy called Jean-Baptiste Leonard. And he said, the blacks are a kind of men destined by nature to inhabit Africa and America. She has created for them burning regions. Let us therefore take note, not to oppose her views or overthrow barriers which she has established, but let us preserve their races in their natural purity and not permit the Negro to inhabit Europe. Very interesting. Interesting because he says they're built for hot climates. Now remember, we've been thrown into a black box. Generally, 9 times out of 10, a guy of the diaspora will be able to tell a difference between someone who isn't. So a Caribbean man will be able to say, be able to identify a Somalian, or a Somalian will be able to identify a Caribbean man. There's little differences that we're able to understand and overstand, but people outside of the nation aren't as adept to understand. For example, a Scottish man might be able to differentiate between a Scot just by appearances and an English guy just by appearances, or a Polish guy and a Romanian guy, or a Bulgarian guy, or whatever kind of guy. Japhetic nations tend to be able to discern between Japhetic nations and so on and so forth, if that makes sense. I'm just using Bible language, but hopefully people understand what I'm saying. We generally know how to discern that, yeah, you look, or you might have, there's a different kind of swagger, there's a different kind of, for one of a better word, spirit, culture, etc., etc. Even though we share similar phenotypes, there's a differences in the way we do things or how we react to things culturally, nationally. And I found this quote as well interesting that we shared before from Jubilees. It says, "This is the land that came forth for Japheth and his sons as the portion of his inheritance which he should possess for himself and his sons, for their generations forever, 5 great islands and a great land in the north, but it is cold." So he's talking about Europe. We know Europe is a cold place by and large. There's certain pockets like Spain and Greece, etc., etc., Italy to a certain degree, that are quite, ambient. But by and large, it's a very cold place. And the further north you go, the colder it gets. Then it says, and the land of Ham is hot. When we look at the Compact Bible Dictionary for Ham, or what Ham is transliterated from, it means hot. So the land of Ham, now we know that Ham had loads of sons, but only one son was cursed. In this landmass today called Africa, only one of these nations had this curse, but many would suggest that this curse had its fulfillment in the time of Joshua, but that's neither here or there because people can argue the toss. But I just want you to see that the land of Ham is hot, but check this, and the land of Shem is neither hot nor cold, but it is blended cold and heat. And the same way that atmospheric is blended cold and heat, the appearances of Ham is blended so that it was able to blend in with Ham. You know, the Shemites were able to blend in with Ham, etc., etc. You know, when Moses blended with the Hamites and Joseph blended with the Hamites. Even Apostle Paul was accused of looking like he was from Mizraim, like he was a Hamite, you know. So we see that these guys were able to blend, and also that their landmass was a blend of cold and heat. Very interesting. All right, gonna switch up the ante a little, and we're gonna start looking at church denominations. So, although the following denominations have encouraged and aided blacks or Negroes, and even contributed money towards their causes, for their causes and work, they also made statements which would lead one to believe that they were mildly / overtly racist, or subtle / blatant white supremacists. And we're going to go through some denominations and their quotes, etc., etc. But before I get into that, I just want to share this another quote by Ibrahim Kendi. He says, New England churches, Protestant churches, routinely gifted captives to ministers. And the reason they did that, I'll leave you guys to research that for yourself. Or, to be honest, you might even see it as we go through the rest of the slides. And then I've just made a quote here. I said, the underbelly of churches, whether black or white, is white supremacy. To qualify, white supremacy is not vulgarity, hostility. It is impartiality, paternalism, which fosters self-hate and deifies, assimilates whiteness. Examples to cogitate that birth the psyche: the curse of Cain, the curse of Ham, Ethiopian skin, and white Jesus publications reinforce self-hate whilst connecting whiteness with godliness. Now we're going to go through and look at a few statements made by churches which indicate elements of white supremacy overtly, indirectly, or they reinforce white supremacy narratives. So we're going to start off with the Mormon Church. I'm going to play this skit and then I'll get back to you guys.
Mormonism teaches that trillions of planets scattered throughout the cosmos are ruled by countless gods who once were human like us. They say that long ago on one of these planets, to an unidentified god and one of his goddess wives, a spirit child named Elohim was conceived. This spirit child was later born to human parents who gave him a physical body. Through obedience to Mormon teaching and death and resurrection, he proved himself worthy and was elevated to godhood as his father before him. Mormons believe that Elohim is their heavenly father and that he lives with his many goddess wives on a planet near a mysterious star called Kora. Here the God of Mormonism and his wives, through endless celestial sex, produced billions of spirit children. To decide their destiny, the head of the Mormon gods called a great heavenly council meeting. Both of Elohim's eldest sons were there, Lucifer and his brother Jesus. A plan was presented to build planet Earth, where the spirit children would be sent to take on mortal bodies and learn good from evil. Lucifer stood and made his bid for becoming savior of this new world. Wanting the glory for himself, he planned to force everyone to become gods. Opposing the idea, the Mormon Jesus suggested giving man his freedom of choice, as on other planets. The vote that followed approved the proposal of the Mormon Jesus, who would become savior of the planet Earth. Enraged, Lucifer cunningly convinced 1/3 of the spirits destined for Earth to fight with him in revolt. Thus, Lucifer became the devil and his followers the demons. Sent to this world, they would forever be denied bodies of flesh and bone. Those who remained neutral in the battle were cursed to be born with black skin. This is the Mormon explanation for the Negro race. The spirits that fought most valiantly against Lucifer would be born into Mormon families on planet Earth. These would be the lighter-skinned people, or white and delightsome, as the Book of Mormon describes them. Early Mormon prophets taught that Elohim and one of his goddess wives
All right. Less of that jazz, yeah? Sound like some Star Wars Superman plot twisted in some esoterical, nonsensical, you know, some Malika Toza. But yeah, that's pretty much what they believe, you know? And I just put that on there because many of us don't know this, but these people believe this. And like I said, let me bring back my guy, my main guy. Let me bring back Ibrahim Kendi. Now, Ibrahim Kendi says, time, this needs to sink in, you know. This should be like, I don't know. But anyway, time and again, racist ideas have been cooked up by ignorant, hateful, it doesn't say that. It says time and again, racist ideas have not been cooked up from the boiling pot of ignorance and hate. Time and again, powerful churches, brilliant men, philosophers, philosophies, and all that kind of D's and B's and X and Z's, and women have made racist ideas, evolution, mark of Cain, whiteness is godliness, in order to justify the racist policies of their era. So notice that they don't want to take accountability for their era. They were made to put a plaster over white supremacy. It was put in place to protect white supremacy. This doesn't mean everyone who's white is a white supremacist. No, it doesn't mean that. And I'm not for any hate against colours and this, that, and the other, because dividing in colours doesn't make any sense. But nevertheless, they made these things to justify racist policies of their era in order. So what was the reason? To redirect blame away from their era's racial disparities. Imagine this though, you know. Put yourself in the thought process of the oppressor's posterity. You know, we get excited when we hear about who do we get excited about? We get excited when we hear about Martin Luther King. Now we know Martin Luther King was questionable. He was a boule, but he did some things, and you know he's like the savior in our community, you know. But we used to, or we currently do, or we no longer do. But we used to get a bit excited for Martin Luther King, or we get excited for Nate Turner, or we get excited for the Maroons, or we just get excited when we hear our history. But imagine though, just imagine, you're hearing that your great granddad Churchill was a genocidal maniac who tried to decimate the population of the Bengal through starving them, and starved so many of their children, women, and men. Who wants to really embrace that legacy of Winston Churchill? If you're that posterity, do you really want to embrace that? How can you, without branding granddad or belittling granddad or putting down granddad, how can you make granddad still appealing even though your granddad was tyrannical and genocidal? How do you rebrand granddad? You rebrand granddad by excusing granddad's behavior and making policies such as the Indians were savages, the blacks were cannibals, the this, that, and the other. And by doing this, you mitigate and you absolve and you diffuse what your granddad did, And it weren't just the men, it was also the women doing these things too. So, you know, women were crying wolf. Another story for another day. The Beauty and the Beast encapsulates the crying wolf. But anyway, how you know, and we got, what's his name, Emmett Till. How do you sanction the Emmett Till? How do you sanction these stories? You have to make it as though, you have to put a spin on it, is what I'm trying to say. You have to put a spin on it, you know what I'm saying? Like, if we was to inherit the same history as a people, and we found out that, you know, Martin Luther King had genocided a whole nation of people just because he wanted their land, you know, how are we going to spin this so it makes him look okay? Or, you know, like, how are we going to spin it? So that's what I'm trying to get you to understand and to see. These things were cooked up to protect the system of supremacy. And also to put a fig leaf over ancestry and the mistakes of ancestry, you know? So it's always something to consider. So let's continue. So the Mormon teaching, it says, the little member girl, 16, sitting between the dark father and mother. It was evident she was several shades lighter than her parents. These young members of the church are changing to whiteness and delightsomeness. So in these religions, you're going to see how a lot of emphasis is placed on becoming more fairer, even though fairer just meant good looking, but now it's been tainted to becoming lighter in shade. You're going to see there's a lot of emphasis put on whiteness being attributed to holiness. Now we know that symbolically, white as snow, you know, you can have it being as a characteristic of holiness, you know, in terms of white as snow, purity, etc., etc. But these semantics have been twisted to what's the word? Uplift the system of white supremacy. Here is your celestial servant like Elder Here is your celestial servant like Elder Peterson promised. If that Negro is faithful all his days, he can and will enter the celestial kingdom. He will go there as a servant, but he will get a celestial resurrection. So he's saying, if the Negro's faithful, he'll get into the celestial kingdom. He'll be a servant, but, you know, he'll get resurrected. So it's good. He's going to get resurrected. He'll be a servant, but, you know, at least he's getting in. So that was their philosophy. So when you hear Mormon and LDS, they're one in the same unit. You got Latter-day Saints and then you got Mormonism. They're one tree, different branch, but they're the same thing in essence. So it says here, Brigham Young, who is one of their leaders, it says, shall I tell you the law of God in regard to the African race? Now, let me just rewind. I said earlier that there's a black box, yeah? How all people of a certain phenotype who are non-white get thrown into a black box. But the rebranded black box is the African box, where everyone gets thrown in the African box. Now, this isn't I'm not being anti this or anti that, I'm just saying we went from everyone just being in the black box to everyone being in the African box. Now, Africa is a continent, and there's various nations in Africa, you know. Europeans don't even like being called European. They like being called what their nation is, primarily, and then secondarily, they like being called what their continent is. So they'll say, I am Spanish, Portuguese, Scottish, English, Irish, you name it. And then secondarily, they'll say what their continent is or claim that. But he says, shall I tell you the law in regard to the African race, which we know is all black people? If the white man who belongs to the chosen seed mixes his blood with the seed of Cain, the penalty under the law of God is death on the spot. This will always be so. I'm happy to say I think this theology has been changed in variation, but this was what was esteemed during the days of this man, Brigham Young. Okay. I've just subtitled this: Doctrine should not change to alter the Negro condition. Negroes are not equal with other races. Notice it's always Negroes that they're singling out, you know. Negroes are not equal with other races where the receipt of certain spiritual blessings are concerned. Then this guy here, Apostle N. Alden Tanner, the church has no intention of changing its doctrine on the Negro. Throughout the history of the original Christian church, the Negro never held the priesthood. There's really nothing we can do to change this. I mean, it's a law of God. So these are the supremacy elements that are deeply embedded into these, denominations, either overtly or inadvertently. Okay. Spencer W. Kimball, General Conference, October 1960. The Book of Mormon tells us that, and he, the Indian, has a dark skin, but he has promised there that through faithfulness that they all again become a white and delightsome people. Now, the thing with Christianity per se is the undercurrent to Christianity is often you must die to self in terms of your culture, your identity, who you are as a person. You must die to self. But that's not what Paul's saying. He's saying you must die to self, die to greed, die to gluttony, die to impatience, die to anger, die to rage, die to violence. He's talking about characteristic death, you know, and being a new creature spiritually. He's not talking about these things, but it's kind of inflated or hyperinflated subtly that you must die to who you are culturally too, and that all culture should be forsaken. But generally, there's only a particular culture that is put up there to be emulated or assimilated into. So there was a popular saying that was "kill the Indian, save the man." And then there was another remix of that was, I'm not going to say that 'cause I'm not really advocating for that on the channel. But yeah, it says kill the Indian, save the man. So the thing was to kill the Indian, the culture, the ancestry, the history. And by erasing the culture, erasing the history, erasing the ancestry, you can kind of mold them into what you see fit, into your version of righteousness, into your version of piety, into your version of anything. And we saw drastic transformations of the Indian into, a carbon copy or of a Eurocentric affiliation. And the same thing happens today, The same thing happens today. But I'm not gonna jump the horse. Let me just go through decently in order and go through the slides. All right, so next slide now. Oh, so we just saw the video of how they say that, Christ was white with blonde hair and this, that, and the other, and there was a war in heaven, and the ones who were not fighting their hardest, they were condemned with black skin, and they became the curse of Cain in Mormon teaching. Whatever that, okay, that's what they say. I don't believe that whatsoever, but that's what they say. Yeah? So we've looked at that, and now we've looked at this. But we've seen a lot of in-your-face, racist, over white supremacy, in-your-face, yeah? No ambiguity, no grey, just black and white, in-your-face, not up for debate. But then, there's a thing called saying one thing and doing the opposite. Yeah? Or like a snake has a split in the tongue, it can talk from this side and talk from that side. So with all they've said all this in your face racist white supremacist stuff, now they're going to buffer that with something that's less in your face. Now, Mormon, this was Prophet Joseph Fielding Smith, 1963, page 79, October the 22nd. He said, I would not want you to believe that we bear any animosity toward the Negro. Darkies are wonderful people, and they have place in our church. Now let me read that again. This is how they get a lot of people hook, line, and sinker, because there's a lot of negative, but then there's a lot of positive, and then we let the positive outweigh the negative, or we let, that's how supremacy kind of works. I'll give you a coconut to befriend you, and then X, Y, and Z. I'm going to change you from the inside out. Your culture's going to be gone. You're going to be stripped, but at least you're going to be a Christian. So hear this. I would not want you to believe that we bear any animosity toward the Negro. Darkies are wonderful people, and they have their place in our church. So, like I said, when you're catching fish, you have to put a particular bait on the line depending on what type of fish you want to catch. So if you want to catfish, I'm not a fisherman, so I shouldn't even be trying to use this analogy. But let's just say you want to catch a catfish, you might use a chicken wing. I'm just being silly. But there's certain bait for certain things. So they say a lot of negative stuff, but then it gets cushioned with things like this. And then people, are more receptive to it because it sounds nice. Or to me, it just sounds condescending. But people are more appreciative of this. All right, let's move to the next one. So Jehovah's Witnesses now. This is the Watchtower, July the 15th, 1902, and it's pages 215 to 216. Just move this laptop so I'm not stretching over. It says, remember I've already said this, you have the black box and you have the Africa box, okay? It says, we are not to forget either that Africa is inhabited by various tribes of nations of Negroes, some more and some less degraded than the average. Those brought to America as slaves were of various tribes, from among whom, no doubt, the Lord is making choice of some for the prospective royal priesthood. While it is true that the white race exhibits some qualities of superiority over any other, we are to remember that there are wide differences in the same Caucasian, Semitic, and Aryan family. And also, we should remember that some of the qualities which have been given to this branch of human family, its preeminence in the world, are not such as can be pointed to as in all respects admirable. Wow. Let's read on to the next highlighted area. The secret of the greater intelligence and aptitude of the Caucasian, undoubtedly, in great measure, is to be attributed to the commingling of blood amongst its various branches, and this was evidently forced in large measure by circumstances under divine control. And it says, it remains to be proven that similar commingling of various tribes of Chinese for several centuries would not equally brighten their intellects, and the same with the people of India and Africa. So this is the mindset. This is what happens, you see, and this is what's in books. This is there for people to read. But like I said, a lot of people especially of this generation, we don't really read, but it's in there, archived in the writing. And it's just a lot of white supremacy, and it's mixed in religion. And I'd say religion is the most white supremacist thing next to education, because with education, you can say, you can kind of refute education. But with religion, it's got a God stamp, it's got a Jesus stamp, and people get scared to kick against a false God, and people get scared to kick against the false Jesus. And even if we're going to use, let me just use the name Jesus. Even Jesus says, many are going to come in my name and deceive many. But we're scared to kick against false Jesuses. And the first commandment says, have no other gods before me. So I know there's going to be false gods, but we hear certain buzzwords, God. We hear certain buzzword, Jesus. And because we've been primed and indoctrinated, and we've been taught how to think, taught how to feel, taught how to respond, taught what's correct, taught what's incorrect, we're still very much good, devoted plantation workers. And Stephen Biko said, the most greatest weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. When you don't think outside the box and let the Ruach HaKodesh guide you into all truth, not some truth, not form, not systems of truth, not forms of truth, not a codified truth, but truth as it is in the Hamashiach, it is what it is. You'll be there. But all right, next one. Role exclusion. That's what I've titled this one. Role exclusion. Okay. There are probably as many as 100 colored brethren on the Watchtower's list. Some of them very clear in the truth and very earnest in its service, financially and otherwise. We have received letters from several of these who had intended engaging in the volunteer work, expressing surprise that in the call for volunteers in March 1st issue, we restricted the inquiry to white Protestant churches. They rightly realize that we have not the slightest race prejudice, and that we love the coloured brethren with just the same warmth of heart that we love the white. And they queried, therefore, why such a distinction should be made in the call. The reason is that, so far as we are able to judge, coloured people have less education than whites. Many of them quite insufficient to permit them to profit by such reading as we have to give forth. Our conclusion, therefore, is based upon the supposition that reading matter distributed to a coloured congregation would more than half of it be utterly wasted, and a very small percentage indeed likely to yield good results. We advise, therefore, that where the Watchtower literature is introduced to coloured people, it be not by promiscuous circulation, but only to those who give evidence of some ear for the truth. We avoid so far as possible putting the pearls of present truth into the hands of vicious, depraved whites as well as blacks. So they were saying, boy, self-explanatory. So you had these guys who were eager beaver to do some evangelism for the Jehovah's Witness Church, and they sidelined them and said, yeah, you got the money, you've got the acumen, you've got the intelligence, but we'll rather get some support from white Protestant churches. And then it says that they write, I like the way it's very condescending, because we don't know if they said these things. We can only go by what the writer is writing on behalf of what he perceives, or we can only go by his account. So he's saying they rightly realize that we have no slightest race, we have not the slightest of race prejudice, and that we love the coloured brethren with just the same warmth that we love the white. So you're thinking, okay, I love, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is I don't know. But anyway, that's what happened, and that's what's there documented for everyone to see. All right, let's move on to the next one. Okay. Watchtower, February the 15th, 1904, page 52 to 53. And this was a question that was put to the Watchtower, and it says, can the Ethiopian change his skin? Now, this is one of the catalysts for why I made the video on Jeremiah's analogy explain the Ethiopian skin and the leopard spots. If you haven't watched that, I strongly encourage you to watch that, because many earnest, sincere, devoted Negro students of Bible, students of prophecy, students of everything, even when they're asked about these certain passages, they don't really have an answer biblically. It's not really something they've inquired about. But these principles, these doctrines, these philosophies are deeply embedded in Christendom and in the psyches. Now, just because this is a Jehovah's Witness article doesn't mean that this is just limited to Jehovah's Witness rationale, because many Christian denominations perceive what's written regarding the Ethiopian skin and leopard spots in the same way as you see here. Okay, so sorry, I got little things popping up. So the question was asked, can the Ethiopian change his skin? We answer no. But all will admit that what the Ethiopian cannot sorry, I have to laugh at sentence 2, you know. All right, come. Okay, can the Ethiopian change his skin? We answer no. But, so when you hear but, going back on everything he just said, so he said no, but when you hear someone say but, they're going back on what they just said. Example, I love you, but your foot stink. Yeah? Going back on what they just said, sort your smelly foot out, and then I can love you properly, you know? But let's go. Can the Ethiopian change his skin? We answer no. But all will admit that what the Ethiopian cannot do for himself, God could readily do for him. Wow. How could all men be brought to perfection? So let me get that arrow so you can see. So we're here, yeah? How could all men be brought to perfection? And which color of skin was the original? The answer is now provided. God can change the Ethiopian skin in his own due time. Then Professor H.A. Edwards, superintendent of schools in Slater, wow, like I said, wow, has written for the public press an elaborate description of how Julius Jackson of New Frankfurt, a Negro boy of 9 years, you know, and put that arrow on that 9 years, you know, 9 years, began to grow white in September 1901 and is now fully 9/10 white. He assures us that this is no whitish skin disease, but that the new white skin is as healthy as that of any white boy. What the heck? Sorry, let me laugh. Oh my day. Anyway, boom. And that the changed boy has never been sick and never has taken medicines. Realizing that his story would be doubted, he entrusted Dr. F.A. Howard, Chief Division Surgeon of Chicago, and Alton Ray, yada yada yada. And he says, I am obliged to you for an opportunity of seeing and examining the Negro child Julius Jackson. I found in his heart, action, respiration, and temperature perfectly normal, and his mental faculties acute for one of his age. The white skin, now covering at least 90% of his body, is, so far as I'm able to judge, in full possession of all its organs, and those organs seem to be performing at their natural function. No roughness, chalky, ashen appearance is present. It seems to me that the conditions warrant your opinion. The change, what does it say? The change is certainly caused by a chemical condition of the blood. Very truly, F.A. Howard. So you got this young boy. Somehow he did a Michael Jackson, did a Uncle Ruckus, Revitaligo. It does happen to a certain degree. Probably more now than ever because a lot of people are bleaching on the sly. But this guy had this thing go on with him, and they saw it as a blessing from the Most High. Now, when you read the scripture, you see a lot of leprosy and the skin going white as being a curse. Now, the reason it's a curse is because you're not able to withstand the sun when you don't have the melanin like that to resist the sun. That's why, in a nutshell. But here they've kind of twisted it and said, okay, it happened to a natural event, and the kind of credited it to the Most High, and as a natural occurrence, that God is readily doing this for him. I've got another part of the article as well that says some more on this story. Okay, let me read this. The following from the New York World is the third we have seen reported. Oh yeah, can restitution change the Ethiopian skin? The following from the New York World is the third we have seen reported. These suggest and illustrate the process of restitution soon due. So they're saying this is an illustration of the process of restitution that will soon be due. So when the Most High comes, when Yeshua comes, this is the twinkling in an eye, when our body will be changed in a twinkling of an eye. Restitution. Yeah, the same from black to white. He's slowly turned. September the 8th. It has fallen to the lot of Reverend William Draper, pastor of Logan Memorial Church of Washington Conference AME Church, of this question: can the Ethiopian change his skin and the leopard his spots? Though once as black as coal, the Reverend Draper is now white. His people say that his color was changing. Listen to this, Listen to this. So, can restitution change the Ethiopian skin color? Being restored back to Christ or Hamashiach, will our skin color change because we're coming back into purity? Yeah? Bear with me on this. So now, when you get to here, you got this Reverend William Draper, a pastor of the Logan Memorial Town, to give a living affirmative answer. So he's going to give a living affirmative answer to the famous biblical question: can the Ethiopian change his skin or the leopard his spots? Draper is now white. His people say that his color was changed in the answer to prayer. Many years ago, Draper was employed by a fair-skinned man, and he was often heard to remark that if he could only be white like his employer, he would be happy. While in the white man's service, Draper experienced religion. From that day forward, he prayed constantly and fervently that he might become white. 30 years ago, his prayer began to be answered. He first experienced a prickling. What these pop-ups, man? He first experienced a prickling sensation on his face, and upon close investigation, found a number of small white spots, scarcely larger than the point of a pin. He became alarmed, thinking he had some peculiar disease. He did not suffer, and aside from the prickling sensation, found nothing unusual. Gradually, the white spots became larger and extended themselves until now. After the change has been in progress for over 30 years, Draper has not a single dark spot on his body. Wow. Many years ago, before this strange metamorphosis took place, Mr. Draper was in charge of the same church he has now. He was popular with his flock, and his departure was a source of great regret. When he recently returned to Parkersburg, there were great rejoicing among the churchmen because their favorite pastor was coming back. When, however, Draper appeared in the pulpit the first Sunday, not one of the congregation recognized him. In fact, it was all he could do. In fact, it was all that he could do to convince them that he was a white man, was the same old black preacher they had years before. Sorry for reading that kind of haphazardly, but the print. You know what? I just can't read. Yeah. All right. Boom. So that's an interesting story, man. You see, I have two accounts of a boy, and they're saying it was the hand of God who turned him from El Negro to El Blanco. And then here you got a man who's a preacher who was praying like Uncle Rocos, and he got his prayer answered. Interesting. So yeah, man. And then the reason I'm going through this history is because we can see these things happening currently. We can see that there's people bleaching themselves in baths to become white. Why? What is the psyche to this? People will say it's self-hate. Okay, where does the self-hate come from? Oh, people will say through racists who say monkey this, monkey that. I beg to differ. That is like, if you're looking at a ladder, that is the bottom of the ladder of supremacy. Supremacy is ideologies, philosophies, manufactured and engineered by educated, intelligent people. Like the quote that I kept referencing said, these things were not grafted by your average Joe, the hillbilly type archetypal, but from, your Boris Johnson, well, but your Boris Johnson type people, and, the educated and the educators, who go to certain places and are taught certain things and they perpetuate it to the next generation, But less of that. Let's continue. Okay. Just moving across on this chair. Okay, so an interesting topic as well that took place in their day, to give this historical importance to, this was written in prior to the Civil War or post-Civil War. So there's a lot of racial tension taking place, and these behaviors kind of are conducive to those events. Now, when you hear the word color line is, you could say, synonymous to Black Lives Matter. Now, we know Black Lives Matter was set up by various agencies, and it's never been for the betterment of our people as a nation. But nevertheless, when you hear the terminology color line, you could see that as being synonymous with like the Black Lives Matter, because the color line was after the emancipation. Everyone was like, how do we integrate these people into society after they've been in a peasantry slave class? How did they and how do we adjust to this emancipation process? Because they weren't just emancipated and free in one day, but it was a process. And the conversation at that time was, how do we restore the color line? Okay, so that's a vernacular, a terminology that you hear a lot in history during this particular time period. It was the color line. All right, so okay, let me get my arrow. Okay, we had this is the color line found necessary. I'll read it from the start actually. We might have anticipated that many colored people would be deeply interested in this drama, but it did not impress itself upon them until gradually their numbers increased to about 25% of the whole audience. Of course, we were glad to see them, glad that they were interested in the drama. We had the same feeling respecting them as others, but it was quickly discerned that it was not a case of feeling, but that whereas the colored people of New York City are 5% of the population in our audiences, they are about 25%, and the number increasing. What shall we do? So you see, even today, the argument is immigrants are going to take over. We're not producing quick enough. We feel threatened by babies. We feel threatened by the population growth of others and not in our community. And this was the same argument. Like literally, when you look at history, nothing. I tell you, nothing has changed. Same argument, same rhetoric. You got George Wallace, who, he kind of came up with fake news. Then you got Donald Trump, who's kind of embellished on fake news. Like it's the same narratives generation after generation, and we kind of fall into the same pit holes. But let me read on. So they're saying, what should we do? Because now we're 5%, and this congregation is now 25% of coloured folk. As the attendance of the coloured people would increase proportionally, the number of whites would decrease. For explaining how a majority of whites prefer not to intermingle closely with other races. So it wasn't just, they just didn't want to intermingle with, and this is religion talking now, This isn't, this is, you know what I'm saying? This is religion, this is a religious book or a religious publishing, accredited to the Jehovah's Witnesses. It says, recognizing that it meant either success or failure of the enterprise of the drama as respect the whites, we have compelled to assign the coloured friends to the gallery, which, however, is just as good for seeing and hearing as any other part of the temple. Some were offended at this arrangement. So they're all there for a drama, and they're saying, we don't really want to be sitting too close during this show, so you guys are going to have to go further afield away from us. And it's saying that some who were in the temple were offended. And it says, we have received numerous letters from coloured friends, some claiming that it's not right to make a difference, others indignantly and bitterly denouncing us as enemies of the coloured people, some confident that Brother Russell, who we know as a Freemason, had never sanctioned such a discrimination, told that they believe it would be duty to stand up for equal rights and always help the oppressed, etc. We are obliged to explain the facts of showing all of our loving interest in the coloured people and of our desire to do them good and not injury. So remember with the Mormons, and they were saying we love, they say all this negative stuff or inadvertent negative or discreet white supremacist stuff, but then they always come with, we love you guys and we appreciate you guys and we want to educate you guys and, expound the gospel onto you guys. But it's always, for the first two that we've looked at, for a self-fulfilling purpose. We again suggested that if a suitable place could be found in which the drama could be presented for the benefit of the coloured people alone, we would be glad to make such arrangements or to cooperate with any others in doing so. All these things keep popping up on my screen. Apologies. It says, we reminded one dear sister that the Lord enjoins humility and assures us that unless we humble ourselves, we shall not be exalted. If nature favours the coloured brethren and sisters in the exercise of humility, it is that by much to their advantage if they are rightly exercised by it. So hear this now. There's a drama. These white Christians don't want to mingle with the other members. So the church separates them from any, what does it say? Where's that arrow? Intermingle with other races. So they separate them from the other races. And then they say, don't worry, we still love you guys, we're cool. There's no drama. And they say if there was a way to watch the drama or to watch the show where you guys could watch it alone, we would be happy to do that. And then it kind of drops a blandishment, which is a nice thing you say to somebody to persuade them. It says then, if nature favours the coloured brethren and sisters in the exercise of humility, it is that much to their advantage. So saying, if you guys are submissive to our base, this is what they're saying, but it's coded, it's religious code. There is a code, I'm trying to say there is a code. So this is what he's saying. He's saying, if nature favours the coloured brethren and sisters in the exercise of humility. Now reading it, you think, oh, that's a nice thing to say. They've acknowledged that, these guys are, their character's a bit different than the oppressor. But he's saying, if nature favours the coloured brethren and sisters in the exercise of humility, it is that much to their advantage if they are rightly exercised by it. So if you guys are submissive and docile and complacent, that's a good, characteristic to have, because we know they're not talking about humility. They're talking about in a docility mentality kind of way. And he says, if you have that mentality, that's a great thing, and you should be exercised by it. A little while and our humility will work out for good. a little while, and those who have been faithful to their covenant of sacrifice will be granted new bodies, spiritual beyond the veil, where color and sex distinction will be no more. A little while, and the millennial kingdom will be inaugurated, which will bring restitution. We all know what their restitution was, yeah? To all mankind, restitution to the perfect mind and body, feature and color, to the grand original standard which God declared very good, and which was lost for a time through sin, but which is soon to be restored by the kingdom of Messiah. So we already know what their restitution color is. So we see the code is so well written in religion that it's kind of hard to see. Now, when it comes to like evolution and Darwinism and eugenics and Blanquiamento and all these kind of things, it's secular. It's easy to discern to a certain degree. The code is, most people who are aware, can discern the code. But when it comes to religion, the code is so well thought of, and it's so well presented and packaged that most kind of overlook it, or they downplay it because it's coming from religion, you know? All right, so this was a publishing in a Seventh-day Adventist article, or publishing, should I say, called the American Sentinel. It says, it is true in a sense that the United States is neither a Christian nor an Anglo-Saxon nation. It is not officially Christian, if thereby it is meant a nation which gives political or financial advantage to one religion over another. It is not Anglo-Saxon. If thereby is meant a nation which sets itself to confer political power upon one race over another, but though it is officially neither Christian nor Anglo-Saxon, it is practically both. Its ethical standards are not those of Mohammedanism or Confucianism, but those of Christianity. Its ruling force in the country, educational, political, and on the whole commercial, is not Celtic, nor Slavic, nor Semitic, nor African, nor Mongolian, but Anglo-Saxon. Thus, its religious spirit, though not altogether in its religious institutions, in its practical leadership, though not in constituent elements of its population, and in its national history and the genesis of its political institutions, the United States is of kin to Great Britain. The two represent the same essential political ideals. They are both democratic. They both represent the same ethical ideas. They are Christian, and they both represent the same race leadership. They are Anglo-Saxon. Now, it might take you a while to masticate what's just been spoken, but yeah, that is very direct and in your face. I'll leave that up for a minute so everyone can see. So it's saying that the United States is not a Christian state, and neither is an Anglo-Saxon nation. Historically, it was never an Anglo-Saxon nation. And in terms of religion, it was never a Christian nation. Yeah, that's what he's saying. But then when you go and you unwrap all the wrapping paper, it's saying it is an Anglo-Saxon nation and it is a Christian nation. And the race leadership of the Christian, of this Christian entity, both politically, educationally, and democratically, is Anglo-Saxon. I was like, raw. That's big. Like, I was like, okay. So they're all just singing from the same hymnal. Whether you're Protestant or Catholic, you know, it's created to serve a purpose. And the leadership is Anglo-Saxon. Or I would say, though, not to use those words, I would say Japhetic, But if I'm going to be very blasé, I would say Javan, because all these guys come from Javan, but that's another story. So, yeah, very interesting. Now, let's move on to this one. An Anglo-American alliance would create a new confederation based on principles and ideas, not on tradition, and bounded by the possibilities of human development, not by geographical lines. It would give a new significance to the motto E pluribus unum, and would create a new United States of the world, of which the United States of America would be a component part, who can measure the advantage to liberty, to democracy, to popular rights and popular intelligence, to human progress, to a free and practical Christianity. With such an alliance, Christianity, with such an Christianity with such an alliance would bring it invincible against enemies, illimitable in influence, at once inspiring and restraining each other, these two nations embodying the energy, the enterprise, and the conscience of the Anglo-Saxon race, would by the mere fact of their cooperation produce a fruit in human history which would surpass all the present imagination can conceive or present hope anticipate. And that Latin word E pluribus unum is a Latin for out of many is one, and it's the motto for the United States. And you also get the Great Seal along with I can't even pronounce those things, but very interesting. The previous quote was very interesting, and that quote was very interesting, saying when these two unite, it will be a force for good in terms of going against enemies, etc., etc. Okay, now here we got the color line. Remember we was talking about the color line earlier? So this is a quote from Ellen White, General Herald, March the 1st, 1901, paragraph 20. It says, "In heaven there will be no color line, for all will be white as Christ himself." It says, because you have colored skin. I don't believe this is Ellen White. I just believe this is an Adventist publication on this one that I'm about to read, where it says, because you have colored skin, that is no sin against God. This you cannot help. Almost seems condescending, potentially, or it could just be genuine, who knows. But you can have a white soul, and you can have a reward in the heavenly courts equal to the reward of any white man. I shall not tell you whether you will be white or black in heaven. I know that you will be just what God wants you to be. Let's read that again. Because you have a colored skin, that is no sin against God. This you cannot help, but you can have a white soul, and you can have a reward in the heavenly courts, equal to the reward of any white man. I shall not tell you whether you will be white or black in heaven. I know that you will be just what God wants you to be. Now, in all publications in the Adventist Church, you see white Jesus. There was a bit of a contention where white Jesus was replaced by a Negroid-looking Jesus due to contention, but by and large, on all historical documents, the Hamashiach is represented as Caucasian in various persuasions, blonde, brunette, whatever. Most notably, on a lot of their records, that's how he is displayed. And we have that quote saying that in heaven, everyone will be white as Christ himself. And that's not talking symbolically or any of that jazz. It's in terms of the color line, which we looked at earlier. It says here, just summarize it in a subtitle: church policy should not change to accommodate the Negro. Now, like I said, these were written in a certain times where there was animosity towards certain people for helping certain people. You could be hung, you could be lynched, you could be this, you could be that. But Nevertheless, cowardice is not, you know, is not an excuse. Let's read. It says, let as little as possible be said about the colour line, and let the coloured people work chiefly for those of their own race in regard to, let as little as possible be said about the colour line, and let the coloured people work chiefly for those of their own race. In regard to white people and coloured people worshipping in the same building, this cannot be followed as general custom with profit to either party, especially in the South. So she's saying that you shouldn't mix church services with coloured and white people as a general custom, but especially in the South. And we know South is where civil, it was kicking off in the South. A lot of racism, Mississippi, Alabama, yada, yada. Yeah? The best thing we will be able to provide the coloured people who accept the truth with places of worship of their own in which they can carry on their services by themselves. This is particularly necessary in the South. Why? In order that the work for the white people may be carried on without serious hindrance. Now you could read that two ways. This is particularly necessary in the South in order that the work for the white people may be carried on without serious hindrance. So you can look at it as the white people who were working in the South to spread the gospel to everybody in the South, or you could look at it as the white people so that they could spread the gospel among the other white people in the South. There's two ways of looking at that. I'll let you guys judge. Next to that, it says, the coloured people should not urge that they be placed on equality with white people. Now, people will argue that was because of, like I said, the social climate of the day, racism, inflated racism, hatred, this, that, and the other. So he's saying that there should be no equality. But we know in the gospel it says there's no Jew, no Gentile, no Greek, no free, no bound. So that goes at variance. There should be and should always be a push for, equality or equity, should I say, biblically, The work of proclaiming the truth for this time is not to be hindered by an effort to adjust the position of the Negro. So we see policy shouldn't change to accommodate the Negro, this, that, and the other. And then we've got here at a general conference in 1889, resolutions. So there's resolutions that were presented in regard to the colour line. So people have came up with they've came together and they've looked at it and they've decided what should be done and how they should address it uniformly as a church or as a denomination, should I say. And such action is not called for. Let not men take place of God, but stand aside in awe and let God work upon the human hearts, both white and black in his own way. He will adjust all these perplexing questions. We need not to prescribe a definite plan of working. Leave an opportunity to God to do something. We should be careful not to strengthen prejudice that ought to have died just as soon as Christ redeemed the soul from bondage of sin. So basically it's like colorblind or, church blind was what was being promoted. Let's just not get involved. Let's just do the gospel. But intimately connected to the gospel is helping the oppressed. Not just nebulously, but practically and even sacrificially. Okay. Because of this ambiguity regarding church policy, in 1958, a white Seventh-day Adventist church in California took action by which a young physician was refused membership because he was a Negro. The local church action referred to a long-standing policy of the denomination following the counsel of the Spirit of Prophecy to maintain separate churches for the colored and the white members wherever possible. Now, there are quotes that say you should embrace and not to exclude, and there are quotes to say that you shouldn't, and there's ambiguity in regards to how it should be enforced or not enforced, as we see there in that particular quotation. Also, we know there were certain buzzwords, supremacist buzzwords to put down others and to dehumanize and to package them as inferior. Now, in the black box or African community, we were just labeled as cannibals, In the native Indian community, one buzzword that stuck out for them was savages. So they were often referred to as savages, And there's two quotes that I got here Adventist quotes where Indians are referenced as savages. Okay. The Holy Spirit has implanted the grace of Christ in the heart of the savages, quickening their sympathies, contrary to their nature, contrary to their education. Now, what is contrary to their nature? Their nature would be their culture. And contrary to their education is obviously education. The light which lighteth every man that cometh into the world is shining in their souls. And this light, if heeded, will guide their feet to the kingdom of God. And we saw that during the Indians in America, they were heavily, their culture was destroyed, you know, kill the man, save the Indian. They were assimilated into the popular culture of Christianity, which we read earlier is a byproduct of Europeans and for the Europeans. And in order to be saved in Yeshua's kingdom, one must assimilate into the European culture or the European religion of Christianity. And we see how over time the Indians' native adornment was stripped away into a more Eurocentric appearance. So another word for this would be the Indian had to become westernized to become civilized. Without becoming civilized, he could never be westernized. So those two terms are both mutually exclusive: civilized, westernized, etc., etc. Where's the audio? There it is. All right, so here was just two random quotes where it says, colored women called to the work of late, as the needs of this field have been pressed upon me. I have been able to sleep but little. Medical missionary work must be carried on among these colored people, who must be given a training in nursing, cooking, and in other important lines of work. There are those among them who must be trained to labor as teachers, Bible workers, and canvassers. So just kind of pre-subscribed certain roles. So the traditional mammy, nanny kind of roles, nurses that we see today, the NHS crisis was saved by, Hebrew nurses, especially in the UK. And then we've got over here, trained coloured men are to be thoroughly educated and trained to give Bible readings and hold tent meetings among their own people. There are many having capability who should be prepared for this work. And where's that quote that we saw earlier? If I can find it. Remember, we had this quote earlier. New England churches, Protestant churches routinely gifted captives to ministers. And the reason they did that was to engineer consent, squash rebellion, and bring people into one fold and of one accordance, and also to, make people submissive and passive. Don't touch certain topics. Don't do this, don't do that. In essence, training one how to think and how to feel, and putting puppet boulets in place. All right, last one before I get into another video for you guys to see. This is a guy by the name of Robert Lee. I don't know if he was a Baptist, he was a Protestant, but I don't know what denomination he was. Probably Baptist, potentially. But he was a Confederate soldier, leader, captain, And he says, in all my perplexities and distresses, the Bible has never failed to give me light and strength. So we see how the Bible has been used by the godly and the ungodly. And because the Bible is a book of laws and principles, anyone can take hold of the laws and principles and it will be a benefit to them. It's not a book of religion, but a book of laws and principles that show us how to love the Most High Yah. Yeah? But hear this. Lee was a slave owner. His own views on slavery were explicated. An 1856 letter that is often misquoted to give the impression that Lee was some kind of abolitionist. In the letter, he describes slavery as a moral and political evil. But then goes on to explain that I think it, however, a great evil to the white man than to the black race. And while my feelings are strongly enlisted in behalf of the latter, my sympathies are more strong for the former. The blacks are immeasurably better off here than in Africa, morally, socially, and physically. The painful discipline they are undergoing is necessary for their instruction as a race, and I hope will prepare and lead them to better things. How long their subjugation may be necessary is unknown, and ordered by a wise and merciful providence. Their emancipation will sooner result from the mild, listen to this part, their emancipation will sooner result from the mild and melting influence of Christianity than the storms and tempests of fiery controversy. So in one hand he's saying slavery is a moral and political evil. Then he's saying that slavery is a good thing because this tribulation that they're going through is going to turn them into better humans. Yeah, and it's going to prepare them for heaven. And then he's saying, and what's going to help them and make them mild is the mounting influence of Christianity. Now, Uncle Issachar put this on his channel ages ago, and I believe it was how the French colonized Belgium. How the French and the Belgian people colonized the Congo, I believe. No, let me say that again. How the French colonized the Congo. Or could be incorrect, but nevertheless, this is the image. And in this image, you see two men holding hands. One's dressed in white, like some Star Wars character, like a Jedi. And the other one's dressed as a general, as an army, as a soldier. And here we see church and state, yeah, both in agreement, yeah, both of them of one accord, reinforcing white Jesus onto these slaves. The worshipping, the church and the state, and the worshipping this false image of the Messiah or of the Hamashiach. Here we see also another image, Slaven, I can't even pronounce that. I don't know where this is. You guys might know. But we see here again, a man offering his child to Seja Borgia. So they're saying the way that we're going to get these Negroes to fall in line is by the mounting influence of Christianity. So Christianity was to pacify and to make people docile, and to make them run around crazy for white Jesus, for want of a better word. All right, so I just want to let you guys watch a short clip and then I'll get back to you. And the short clip is by the president of Ghana. I want you to listen very attentively. He's going to share his experience as the president of Ghana, who is the president of Ghana. So he's not an average Joe. And he's going to share his experience of Christianity. He is a Catholic, or was a Catholic, or is still a Catholic, I don't know. But he's going to share his experience of what it's like for him, even as a president in the system of white supremacy, politically and religiously.
In the process of trying to modernize, we've ended up being westernized to the point where, as I sit here before you, when I wanted to even name my children African names, heroic names, I'm a Catholic. The Catholic Church, or that character, back at home, said, no, I cannot. There'll have to be Catholic names. I mean, those Catholic names are European names. I went through an argument with this priest, and I said, listen, I have a right to my identity. Don't take away my identity. Okay? I mean, Christianize me if you may, but don't Westernize me. We made some beautiful Christmas cards that depicted Christmas in an African setting. And the Christmas cards sold so well, even with Catholic nuns, white Catholic nuns. We wanted to secure the patent. I went to an office, the Registrar General's office, to secure the patent. Can you believe that this fellow African, Registrar General, looking at my black personality, black face, told me that, no, I cannot. This was long after independence, and that it's going to take about 3 years. I said, why 3 years? He said, it'll have to go to England. It will go to England, and it might take about 3 years before I'm granted the right to that patent or whatever it is that register. In other words, in effect, what I'm trying to say is that, so I have no right to even my creativity. I create my own, you take it away from me, and you have to send it to the colonial power. 3 years later, when they have reproduced it, and I have no more right to it. So as an African, when you're talking about democracy, etc., let's put it aside.
So he's sharing his experience, which kind of amalgamates what we've looked at already in terms of religious and political side of Christianity. Christianity is not, it's never been a religion of peace. It's just, I'm not talking about the Bible. Let me just differentiate. There's a difference between the Bible and the word, and thus saith the Lord, and it is written, and then the institution of Christianity. If you look at the history, if you look at the resume of Christianity, it's never been a peaceful religion. Even when it was in Europe, it was never a peaceful religion. As it cascaded down into Africa, it was definitely not a peaceful religion. As it went across the pond, it wasn't a peaceful religion. In whatever package, in whatever branding style you want to put it in, it's never really been a peaceful religion. Now the word, the unadulterated word, in conjunction with the Ruach, that's always been, blessed. But in terms of isms and schisms and circumcisions, it's always been contentious. So that president of Ghana was saying that even him, or the former president, should I say, or prime minister, he's saying even for him, where he is at the top of the chain, he has to go through colonial hurdles to even get things sanctioned. He had to. He was told that he should name his child a Christian name, so he couldn't give him his identity. His identity had to be enshrouded in a Eurocentric religion, a Eurocentric ideology, a Eurocentric identity, despite him being a so-called African. And the reason he had to get permission from England is because England was the former colonizer. So it just goes to show you how even after independence, the colonizer had his tentacles still in this particular part of the world, in its politics, its religion, in all elements of its institution. The only thing that changed was the flag color, but everything else, the trade, the religion, the politics, the semantics, they all stayed the same. So that's his experience, and I just found that necessary to include, given what we've looked at so far. Okay, so wrapping up very shortly. So religion and education stimulate supremacy ideology. This current, should I say, not even current, the education, this Grecian classical thinking, all this kind of Eurocentric education is built upon and built for the continuation of white supremacy. Now, this is not saying all white people are racist. This is saying there's an ideology called white supremacy, where it puts white people at the top and everyone else is other or ethnic or BME or anything other than what they are. So anyway, John Henrik Clarke, he says, religion is the organization of spirituality into something that became the handmaiden of conquerors. So religion was like a cauldron mixed together to gainsay the masses. Now, when you go to India, you know, I don't know if you guys have watched Chris Rock, Good Hair. When you go to India, they have a religion, and all over the world there's a religion in various countries that relate to the inhabitants, and these religions are pretty much, you could say, shackles on the mind. So in India, their women are seen as pious if they cut their hair and sacrifice it for their deity. But unbeknownst to these loyal, passionate, religious people, their hair is then marketed, well, cleaned, sterilized, marketed, and then sold to the Americas, to Europe, for Negro women to put into their hair, and even Japhetic women to put into their hair, you know, as weave extensions, this, that, and the other. But in their part of the world, the religion teaches them that to cut their hair is piety. But you can see how the religion is just there to monetize and make money off people. Similarly, Christianity, you've seen how certain things are coming in to monetize and make money off people. You know, SPAC Nation did an incredible, unrighteous job of monetizing the gospel, but they're not the first. You got Bishop T.D. Jakes, you got Benny Hinn, you've got Joel Osteen and Joyce Myers and John Hagee and all these guys, yeah? So they've just monopolized religion to control the masses. It says nearly all religions were brought to the people and imposed on them by conquerors and used as a framework to control their minds. You shouldn't think like that. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't say that. And half the time there's no thus saith the Lord. There's no it is written. No Bible passage. It's just feeling and thoughts and feelings. Next one by John Henry Clark says, if you expect the present day school system to give history to you, you are dreaming. This we have to do ourselves. The Chinese didn't go out in the world and beg people to teach Chinese studies or let them teach Chinese studies. The Japanese didn't do that either. People don't beg other people to restore history. They do it themselves. Jane Elliott, she says this, you know exactly how to act white, and that's the message in the schools in your country and mine on a daily basis. So, religion, education has always been used as a muzzle to subdue or to reinforce supremacy, whether distorted religious doctrines or tainted miseducation. Religion and education go hand in hand. And as I'm starting to understand more and more, I'd say religion is probably more than the education. Because like I said, education, you're dealing with a man. But when it comes to religion, you're dealing with a deity. So people be like, wow, you know, but, you know, you're talking against this deity. So there's more of there's a superstition attached to why they won't speak out against it. But with education, you know, people will say, oh, okay. But when it comes to religion, it's another issue entirely, you know? Okay. The simplicity of Yeshua's message. If you love me, he didn't ask you to like. He didn't ask you to share. He didn't ask you to type yes. And he didn't ask you to type amen. He says, if you love me, which is conditional based on your response. He says, if you love me, obey my commandments or keep my commandments. Keep means to guard, to preserve. Psalm 96 verse 5. For all the gods of the nations are idols. Now, one more video and then I'm going to close off. Very, very short clip.
Anybody know who Willie Lynch was? Anybody? Raise your hand. He was a vicious slave owner in the West Indies. The slave masters in the colony of Virginia were having trouble controlling their slaves, so they sent for Mr. Lynch to teach them his methods.
Keep the slave physically strong, but psychologically weak and dependent on the slave master.
Keep the body, take the mind. I and every other professor on this campus are here to help you to find, take back, and keep your righteous mind.
Now, in closing, I just want to say this is a spiritual war, and everyone on the plantation has been lied to, including the farmers. I pray the Ruach will liberate our minds to worship our Father in spirit and in truth. And the truth is a living water, not a stagnated pool. 2 Corinthians 10 verse 4 says, "For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through Yah to the pulling down of strongholds." So truth will just break down all these deceptions, all these spider webs, these webs within webs, you know, these Webster's dictionaries. But you'll just break down all these falsehoods and these platitudes and these arguments and these rhetorics and this, that, and the other. I like this quote by Alvin Toffler. I always often quote it. It says, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." And lastly, again, to repeat what Ali said, hating people because of their color is wrong. And it doesn't matter which color does their hating. It's just plain wrong. So I hope you find that interesting, and as always, provoking thought. I just wanted to end with this in terms of imagery and representation, and how when imagery is consistent with who people are instead of what they're being probed to be, to a degree, it can have a positive impact on the family structure, on who we are as individuals, etc., etc. So I just wanted to share this brief video because they don't really make this like this. They don't really make videos like this, should I say, anymore. So let me just quickly show this quick commercial.
There's Afro Sheen conditioner at hairdress. Then for the real test against the hawk, it's Afro Sheen holding hairspray, a protein hairspray that holds even in damp weather without any flaking or dulling. Now that you've decided to be beautiful, stay beautiful, and keep your proud natural together. Afro Sheen handles the hawk.
Yeah, so guys, that's it. That's the end of the study. I just wanted to show that video to encapsulate what true representation can do, and the empowerment of seeing two black couples on a commercial together. Lately, there's been a lot of, a black man, a white woman, black man, which isn't done, which causes division, not just in the so-called Negro community, but in the white community too, because, we're blending certain things and this, that, and the other. So I just wanted to show what representation is about and how it has changed over from what it was, and how these can have an impact on us mentally. And by mentally, then it can become a obstacle spiritually, So for example, there are certain people that will be put off the gospel because they see a white image of Jesus and they can't fathom how that even lines up. So they'll be put off the message because of that. And then conversely, there's people who, if they see an image and is true, or how he should be, they'll be put off because of the white supremacy that they've inherited through their parents, etc. So what I'm trying to do really is squash the mental constraints by bringing truth to set people free by Yahshua's grace, by the Most High's grace. That's what we're trying to do, hopefully, because like I said, there's deception on both sides, and even the farmer has been deceived. Even the overseers are deceived on the plantation. Satan chiefly, but we know Satan works through nations and works through deceit and causing this, that, and the other. So that's what I just wanted to bring home at the end of the day. So I want you to take home from this that if we go back to what we looked at initially, in terms of the first couple of slides. So this is what we looked at initially in terms of representation. If you have the wrong representation, a distorted representation, if you look in a mirror and the mirror is distorted or the mirror is cracked, then the way you see yourself is going to be through a cracked mirror, you know? So when you have the true mirror, which is the word of the Most High, and you look through the word of the Most High, then you should be able to see yourself reflected, you know, or see how we're supposed to be as a people, as a nation, and as a stranger, you know. But when you have all these distorted caricature images, they're not just there doing nothing, but internally, subliminally, people are being probed, people are being programmed to be less than human, to be hypersexualized, to not be taken seriously, to be seen as intimidating and scary. So imagery is powerful because it can reflect how one is seen and how one sees themselves. And I hope that this cleared up a few things that take place currently in society. You know, we've gone through the history, we've gone through a bit of the religion, we've gone through the scriptures, and we've seen how these same narratives, these same sound bites are given perpetually, and then we gravitate towards these stereotypes, not knowing that these stereotypes were invented and created and given to us to assimilate, which takes us away from the Most High. And I just want to bring that home to everyone so that we can understand and overstand. Next week, by Yah's grace, I want to conclude this kind of looking at the sons of Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And I wanted to spend a little bit more time on Canaan, because there's a story in Jubilees that looks at the Exodus account, and you'll be surprised of what actually was going on and why Israel was so impressed to want to stay in Egypt post the Exodus. Yeah, so we're going to look at that, and hopefully it gives us a broader perspective on what was going on by Yah's grace. And you know, I hope everyone has a blessed week, and that we're able to catch up next week by Yah's grace.